of the company. And next to me is Charlene Solomon, who is the president of RW3 Culture Wizard. And then below us is Sean DeBerk, who is our director of learning. Throughout today's webinar, Sean and I will be handling the bulk of the conversation. Charlene will be joining us and will be answering questions and helping you to manage the flow of the conversation. So here we go. So just as a little background, since almost all of you are RW3 clients, you know who we are. We are the ones who bring you your Culture Wizard site and the other training courses that folks participate with us on. We've had over 30 years of experience in intercultural global business skill development, and we've been conducting programs on global business skills throughout the world for the leading corporations in the world. Recently, we've begun to focus dramatically on developing global leadership skills and introduced a new and upgraded our track on global leadership development skills. So much of what we cover today will be available to you, and during the presentation later, Sean and I will cover a good bit of what's on that track and how you can benefit from those courses as well as from this webinar. So before we begin, Sean's going to introduce us with a couple of housekeeping items.
Thanks, Mike. I'd just like to briefly familiarize you all with the GoToWebinar platform that we're using today. We have hundreds of participants, so the phones will remain on mute, but we do want to encourage questions. So please locate the questions area of the GoToWebinar dashboard. You can use this space to send us your thoughts. We'll also have a dedicated 5 minutes at the end of our webinar for questions and answers, and we'll be sure to email all of you a recording of the webinar next week in case you'd like to share that with anyone who couldn't join us today. I also wanted to mention that if you don't know how to currently access your Culture Wizard site at your organization, please just send us an email at info@rw-3.com, and we'll help get you set up right away. All right, Mike, back to you.
Great. So, as you may know, this is the third in our Global Leadership webinar series. We began with the general introduction to global leadership. Last March, we had a session on self-awareness and authenticity, which you'll point out is a critical component of global leadership. Today, we're focusing on the global mindset. And then at the last program in this year's session on that is going to be on trust and collaboration, which is in November. So we're going to cover all this material today, and it's a rich, intense program, by beginning with a quick review of what we've covered in webinars 1 and 2, and a discussion of the global leadership model. And after that, we'll delve into the process of mastering the global mindset, and we'll take questions from you at the end. And by the way, all through the program, use your chat boxes. Joshua Sturtevant, our CTO Vice President, is also on the line with us, and he and Charlene and Sean and I will be handling and answering questions both online and through the course. And if something important pops up, Joshua will interrupt us and we'll answer your immediate questions. So let's make this as interactive as you possibly can make a webinar session. Okay, so a quick review of our leadership model. Look, we created the global leadership model because we believe that leadership, like culture, is a learnable skill. And not only that it's learnable, but that you've got to master it and learn it in order to maximize your careers and your contribution to the organization as well. So the model is designed to make leadership learnable. It basically contains a series of interrelated learning components. The reason we chose gears and cogs in a machine is that in order to be an effective global leader, you've got to make all the components of this global leadership model work in conjunction and work effectively, and you've got to master all of those components. We don't focus on the core of the model, which is basically how you got here. The model presumes a functional competency, so we can't tell you about your job. It presumes that you know how your organizations work and that you have the personality traits to be recognized in your organization. But it builds on that and takes you through the teachable components by us of a global mindset. So in webinar 1, we focused on the model and the components of the model and gave an overview of how we treat the components of the model and how we teach it. So conceptually and practically, the model, learning global leadership, begins with gaining a degree of authenticity and self-awareness. All the research that's been conducted in this field identifies self-awareness as the single uniform trait of great global leaders. And there is no other uniform trait amongst great global leaders. The single uniform trait is these people know who they are and they know how they're perceived in the world, and that is the essence then of great global leadership, and we focus on that as the initial core. Sean likes to think of this as working from the inside out. We make you aware of who you are as a leader and what innate skills you have, and then build out from those skills with additional components. The next part of the model that we talk about is global mindset, which we're going to focus on today, and subsequent to that, since we believe that the leadership model needs to be practical and give you skills to take to the workplace, the last component that we identify, which is in the November program, is putting authenticity, global mindset to work in building trust and collaboration amongst your teammates. So in webinar 2, we focused on the issue of authenticity and self-awareness and how our values and behaviors are the result of our life experiences. We introduced a life map, which is a really interesting way for all of you to be able to trace the key events in your life which shape your values and shape your behaviors to make you the leader that you are today. And going through that internal examination of your values, behaviors, and how they make you who you are today is a really worthwhile process, and we strongly recommend that you take some time, if you haven't yet, in the life map. Because, in fact, it is your authenticity that enables your followers to trust you. And without trust, you haven't got the essence for effective global teamwork. So Sean is going to take us through the next part of what we covered in webinar 2, which is the uniqueness of authenticity in a global environment.
Thanks, Mike. And during our second webinar, we addressed this question you see here, which is what does it mean to be an authentic leader in a global environment? And as one seeks the best results from a global organization, we really believe that the conventional definition for authenticity no longer holds. In a single culture context, being authentic generally means being consistent as a person in all situations, perhaps employing a somewhat recognizable or hallmark style that is true to a person's origin or background. Being authentic in this context may or may not include a deep sense of self. Now, looking at the global definition that we've developed, the authentic global leader is not only 100% aware of her or his core style, but carefully measures the impact that it has on others, and as a result feels very comfortable and is very effective at flexing their approach accordingly, because she or he knows that flexing will oftentimes bring out the best results from a global workforce. We'll be looking at some specific practices you can use to flex later in our webinar. With that, I'd like to give the floor back to Mike.
So what we have found, though, is that self-awareness and authenticity are not enough. You can be authentic, self-aware, and play pretty well in a domestic audience. But when it comes to a global environment, you need to understand how you're perceived by other cultures. And since a global leader needs to communicate a message in a way that its followers or her followers will absorb, they need to have a global mindset. So today's program is going to focus on how you build this global mindset, how you align people around a common purpose, which is a role of the global leader, how you can unite people to a shared set of common values and get them all to believe and trust each other in that process, how you can empower others to step up, to both lead and to collaborate effectively, and in that way bring a leadership capability to the entire organization. So what is a global mindset? Back in 2009, when Charlene and I wrote Managing Cross Cultures, which is in fact the keys to doing business with a global mindset, we defined the global mindset as an ability to reflexively integrate cultural awareness and adjust your style to the signals you're getting from your followers or from your colleagues without compromising business values and goals. Reflexively, you've got to own the information, own the cultural awareness, and therefore you can play it out. Over the years, we have modified that message a little bit, the global mindset definition a little bit, because we become aware that the global mindset is really the confluence of three disciplines. It begins with the self-awareness and authenticity, which is what we've been talking about, and brings in cultural fluency and personal attributes. Taken together, those three capabilities, knowing who you are, being culturally competent, understanding how your personal attributes affect other people and affect your ability to work in a global environment, giving those three things, melding those together, arms you with the global mindset. And the cool thing is that on your Culture Wisdom site, you've got places to learn about develop the cultural competencies on the ICAM, and also understand what your personal attributes are and how they impact your leadership activities using the Global Leadership Development Tool.
Okay, so let's take a moment here and just look at where everybody is right now. So we'd like you to write down your answers just by yourself, and I'll read the questions now. Your 1 is on the scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not true or not very true, 5 being very true, okay? Number 1, I consider the impact of global events on my business and marketplace. 2, when experiencing challenges with global colleagues, I wonder if they're culturally based. When developing a message, I consider the communication preferences of the audience. 4, when leading across cultures, I seek feedback on my performance from peers outside my culture. Next, at work-related events, I actively seek out conversations with people from cultures other than my own. 6, I recognize when I need to flex my style to adapt to culturally distinct environments. And finally, when meeting people from other cultures, I enjoy learning about their world and ask many questions. So again, on a scale of 1 to 5, just rank yourself on those. And we'll take a second, and then we have a score. You don't need to submit them or anything like that. Okay. So if you get a score, if you have a score, tally them up. And if you have a score of 30 to 35, well, you probably already know that you do have a very global way of looking at the world and a global mindset, but we're hoping that you'll get some nuances and subtleties here. 25 to 30, you know, hopefully will gain some more skills and develop that even further. 20 to 25, you do have some global business skills and sensitivities, and there's more to master. And less than 20, we hope you're going to pay close attention here. All right? So, but we think that that gives you a gauge of some of the behaviors that we hope you'll start to integrate into your way of interacting with the world. Okay, Mike, to you.
Great. So the process that we're going to be discussing of mastering a global mindset has 5 component steps, and I'll kind of go over them here quickly, and then Sean will delve more deeply into them. So it begins, the process really begins with recognizing your own cultural values and biases and appreciating, understanding that other people have different values, and you're not right, they're not wrong, and you're not better than, or smarter than they are. It's just a difference in approach, and really integrating and understanding it so that you can recognize it in others. It then moves to having a curiosity about the world, needing a curiosity about people, wanting to learn, understand, to know about people, and to know how world events and the way things are done in the world impact your business. The next step is that you need to learn about the specific cultures of the countries you're working with. I want to digress for a moment and tell a little quick story about something that you may have read about in last week's press. It turns out that Toyota, which is a great global company, has set about to become, and wants to become more diverse and recognizes its need to become more diverse. So they've created a search for diverse talent, and they identified a woman in the United States to head up their global communications efforts. You can imagine what a company like Toyota put into that effort. They hired her. She was the highest ranking woman and the highest ranking Westerner in Toyota. She went to Tokyo. She had apparently had a knee injury and was using a medication, and she ran out of the medicine, and according to the police reports, her dad sent her some of the medication. And after 2 weeks in Tokyo, the police came to her hotel room and arrested her for having illegal drugs, put her in jail for 20 days in a Japanese prison with other prisoners, because the Japanese laws are very strict on that. And it wasn't until the intercedence of Carolyn Kennedy, the U.S. ambassador to Japan, that she was released. Clearly, knowing about the cultures of the countries you're working in is important, but there's another interesting aspect of this story that I want to point out. As you know, Japan is a country that focuses a great deal on face, and the president of Japan, Mr. Toyoda, came out and apologized to all of the people, apologized to the people of the company, and took responsibility, saying that he didn't adequately take care of his children and his family, which is kind of the way a leader in Japan of Toyota's stature defines his role. Very different than defining a leadership role in the West. So I thought it's kind of interesting focusing on the importance of understanding that. Back to the mindset model here. The next step is to develop strategies so that you can integrate the knowledge you gain about other cultures into the way you interact and manage in those cultures, and develop an ability to flex your style so that you can be effective. And lastly, it's to constantly test your competency by continuing to learn and putting yourself into intercultural relationships and situations where you grow and expand your understanding. And with that, Sean will dive in a little deeper into these components.
Thanks, Mike. So diving in here, this first step is really a bridge between the introspective exercise of looking inward at what makes you a unique cultural being, and then looking outward at the people you lead to appreciate how their expectations of you as a leader are unique. You may recall one of these fish out of water experiences when you traveled abroad for the first time and realized that your way of life was culturally bound to the environment in which you were raised. Exploring cultural differences and their origins really helps you develop a non-judgmental perspective on other people's behaviors. Leaders with global mindsets are open to differences because they have less rigid views of what is right and wrong, what is appropriate and inappropriate, and they're less likely to treat people from different cultures as inferior, which really paves the way for more creative and productive global leadership activities. Now, on the how side, we've listed 3 resources you can find on the Global Leadership track on Culture Wizard. The first is the Global Leadership Life Map, which can really help you raise self-awareness by getting in touch with your life story. It also includes space to make connections to your present-day leadership style, which is a powerful way to develop that authentic leadership that we've been talking about. The Global Leadership Calculator can show you specific cultural gaps that you have as a leader with the expectations of your colleagues in over 150 countries. And this is a brand new tool that we've released just recently. I'm going to be spending a little bit more time in detail showing you how you can use the gap analysis feature of this tool to map out what you want to do to flex for success. And the third item here is the Global Leadership Development Tool, which measures 5 unique and critical personality attributes that you need to develop as a successful global leader. The tool also provides suggestions for how to strengthen those attributes. So just once again, these are all available on the Global Leadership Skills Learning track. It's a big green square on the homepage of Culture Wizard. You can go there to find all of these resources. Now moving on to the second step here. This is all about being humble and curious about the world and the people and places in it. Being curious about the people that you lead is really going to encourage you to ask others about themselves. And in effect, if you ask the right questions, if you ask appropriate questions, being curious can broaden your cultural knowledge base. Being in a state of continuous learning and always being curious and believing that there's always something to learn from the world comes with this orientation of being a humble and curious leader. Asking questions is simply a great way to learn and to also establish relationships and to develop trust with people. I often recommend to global teams to use cultural differences as a conversation topic to develop that trust that is often missing when you're working virtually, you're disconnected and you can't see people face-to-face as frequently as you would in your home office. Now moving on to the how side, if you don't find that you're naturally curious, it's really important if you're going into global leadership roles to teach yourself to ask questions and to engage in what I like to call curiosity conversations to get to know people in parts of the world that you don't know enough about. It's also essential to get in touch with media sources and even films that originate or come from countries that you need to know more about. I remember a time when I advised a senior executive to watch a film that I actually really love. It's called Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Some of you may have seen it or may have heard of it. It's a fascinating, really beautiful documentary about a sushi chef in Tokyo that illustrates a very core Japanese work ethic and also a leadership style that this individual needed to become familiar with in his role. And I loved hearing from him that it was a really perfect first step into his learning path about leadership in Japan. So think about the ways in which you verify your understanding of the world, ways in which you can be curious and engage and turn on that curious side that we all have and really delve into that to gain those insights that we need to be effective as global leaders.
And Sean, we got one question about finding foreign films. What's the best source? And what I would suggest is you can just Google the best foreign films, and there's a site that'll give you a listing of the 100 best foreign films.
I think that's great. Finding those top films that have been recognized as being, spectacular, extraordinary films is great. Netflix is also available in lots of countries these days. They've expanded hugely, and they have a remarkably long list of foreign films available from lots and lots of countries. So I often go there as well to see if what I want to watch is available. Thank you for that, Char.
Mm-hmm.
So learning the specifics of other countries is really important because you can't make assumptions in such a complex work environment. You certainly can't memorize everything about every country or culture. Learning about business norms, laws, important political figures, cultural customs, any other relevant aspect of daily living is going to be vital to your credibility as a leader responsible for people in a range of locations. And this knowledge can be as simple as understanding that the weekend in Saudi Arabia is on Friday and Saturday, or that you shouldn't expect people in France to respond to emails after business hours, given recent legislation prohibiting folks from accessing their work emails after their normal business hours. So of course you can use resources like the country profiles on Culture Wizard, which you can now access on our Culture Wizard mobile app to instantly bring up valuable insights, very detailed insights into business in over 150 countries. Of course, there's no replacement for real-life cultural experiences both on or off the job. So it's crucial to seek global projects, to seek business travel or international assignment if possible. But without traveling, you can always learn about other countries through the colleagues that you have or the clients that you serve that are spread around the world.
Sean, one question that came in I think would be valuable to address is how can you, when you're in this process of curiosity and learning about another culture, how can you ask questions of someone from another culture that wouldn't be considered too forward or too rude?
Yeah, that's a really important question to ask yourself, and there's some due diligence that you can complete by looking at the conversation topics article on the country profile. So each country profile contains a special area that lists the topics of conversation that are appropriate, those that are taboo, those that you want to avoid. But as a general rule of thumb, I usually lean on geography to figure out where people are from by asking where do you come from, which part of your country were you raised, what was it like growing up there, sharing information about your family and kind of reciprocating and asking the same of your colleagues is usually a safe bet. Avoiding any kind of really serious or complex topic is usually not the best way to start becoming curious about your colleagues, but certainly going back and forth about the very specific global nature of your interaction, just defining what it's like to be a professional in your part of the world and exploring the same on the other person's end is usually a nice way to start that. All right, so let's go on to the next step. This is the fourth step in this process, and as we've made clear, the global environment really requires us to expand our repertoire of leadership behaviors and strategies to be culturally appropriate and culturally effective as we lead people around the world. There's no quick fix for this part of mastering a global mindset, but balancing between diverse peoples will really require you to be flexible and relatively comfortable with ambiguity, as this global workplace really presents a plethora of challenges that you may not always have solutions to. So on the how side, it's so valuable to seek feedback from the peers in other countries on how your style is received in their part of the world. This feedback is often hard to get because relationships are weaker when you're working globally and virtually most of the time. So you need a strong, trusting, interpersonal relationship for this kind of feedback to come your way. We've also listed a few books that we think are great reads and complement our approach to developing global leaders. Andy Malinsky wrote a book called Global Dexterity that goes into great depth on how to develop new behaviors that you can execute authentically. Learning how to behave in a slightly different way, but still coming off in an authentic way that's not cringeworthy, is kind of the crux of his book. It takes time to really develop these strategies, but his concepts are easy to understand. And I've included this image of a sumo wrestler here because he's really flexing in a way that's symbolic of what you might need to do in a global environment as a global leader. Now, I want to, as part of this step, I want to highlight the Global Leadership Development Tool once again here because it measures 5 personality attributes that are critical to flex for anyone engaged in global leadership activities, and they include emotional resilience, cultural sensitivity, the ability to form relationships, the ability to manage complexity, and a goal-oriented tenacity. And when I think about how a global leader would put these attributes to use, I imagine how important it would be to stay, hyper-focused and motivated when you're, for example, getting off a long 14-hour flight to a place like South Korea and going straight to a meeting that you're conducting through interpreters, which means that your meeting takes twice as long as it normally would. And on top of this, you have to manage cultural differences that make it very difficult to get decisions without consulting everyone your project affects. And all the meantime, having to cultivate relationships with your contacts by going out to drink soju and to sing karaoke afterwards and when your jet lag is kicking in at dinner time. So imagine the complexity of this kind of global leadership activity and having to really maintain your composure. And these 5 attributes basically give you an insight into where you stand and gives you suggestions on what you might want to do to ramp up on some of these attributes that are important to everyone, everywhere, engaging in these kinds of activities.
The global development.
I'd like to go ahead, Mike.
Global development tool recommends some strategies and defines some of the situations, because you can imagine, even from what we're talking about in terms of the confluence of forces in a global in a global mindset, managing complexity is there. They are complex by their very nature, because you've got the business goal that you're dealing with, you've got the different styles that it's being dealt with, and you've got to discern how to best manage the way your instinct to get the job done, which is what got you here in the first place, how to manage that in a way that will resonate with the folks that you're working with. Charlene was going to say something. Charlene? Oh, a little technical hitch up somewhere, so okay.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and move on. Thanks for that, Mike. This final step here is all about testing and applying what you've learned by leveraging your existing relationships or forging new intercultural or global relationships. And just like learning to speak a foreign language, learning how to lead in a global environment requires immersion experiences with people from around the world. And while some of us can get this from business travel or from being on international assignment or from relocating permanently from one country to another, many of us are only presented with opportunities to work with colleagues in a virtual setting. So these opportunities to forge relationships are valuable opportunities to test your understanding of cultural differences vis-a-vis communicating, building trust, building relationships, and simply to test your ability to flex a different leadership style, a new behavioral response, or some kind of strategy that you've considered that may get you to a better place or a better outcome based on your understanding of cultural difference. Of course, global leaders also often report that their global network of business and social contacts are a key lifelong benefit to being in that role as a global leader. Now, on the how side, how do you do this? To really test yourself, I would suggest that you take advantage of any visiting colleagues that you have coming from around the world to your office to get to know them, or reach out online to get to know people in your area or other areas of the business that you're curious about. Finding mentors within leadership is always a really great idea to help you perfect your approach to specific markets, finding people that have the experience that you seek to, again, test the way that you would flex to get some instant feedback around how your ideas may actually pan out. And of course, use Culture Wizard to learn about the expectations of your colleagues around building relationships and trust so that you don't unknowingly stifle your efforts through any kind of cultural misunderstanding, which can very easily erode trust. I'd also just suggest going beyond your professional workplace and exploring your social networks, looking to your family, your neighbors, and to take any opportunity that you can to expand your understanding of cultural difference in the world in any place that you can find it. So, yes.
Just go back a second. It's also useful to think here for a little bit about testing how you're doing in one-on-one communications with people and colleagues from other cultures. Keep in mind that when you do that, folks have public and private personas. And there's questions you can ask folks in private that are pretty broad, far-reaching that you can't do in public. So building relationships and establishing trusting interpersonal relationships and finding a way to learn about how you're coming across in an interesting process in private offline conversations is a resource you should also take advantage of.
Excellent. So why don't we illustrate how you can start mastering a global mindset through an example that we've prepared. And you can combine the online learning via Culture Wizard with this idea of flexing a new style in a real-life scenario. And what you're seeing here is a screenshot from the Global Leadership Calculator, which is our new version of the Culture Calculator, which many of you may be familiar with. But this one's different because it actually provides you with a debrief of a specific gap that you have from the global leadership perspective, and it provides insights on how you can flex for success as a global leader. So if you click on the analysis button for any of these dimensions here, you'll get a debrief on whatever gap you have in your profile that provides some tactical examples for how you might want to bridge your gap in your leadership style with the business norms and leadership expectations of another country.
And by the way, if you've already completed the Culture Calculator, your scores will carry over into the Leadership Calculator, so it's all there for you, loaded with insight as to how your personal profile plays in leadership situations across cultures.
Exactly. So as you start to develop this global mindset, we'd all recommend that you start with this Global Leadership Calculator, looking at your gaps with countries that are relevant to your role, and then thinking about how these differences would manifest in an actual workplace situation. So what we're going to do now is actually take a look at a cross-cultural dialogue that illustrates how a gap might surface in your own workplace.
How is the evaluation going, Nisu?
It's finished, ma'am. We can start on the report anytime now.
Good. How long do you think it will take?
Ma'am?
To write the report.
I couldn't say, ma'am.
You don't know how long it will take?
When would you like it, ma'am?
Well, I want to give you enough time to do a good job.
We'll do a good job, ma'am. So we're chuckling a little bit here because it's always interesting to use dialogues like this because of the subtle kind of nuanced meaning that is interwoven into the words that these characters have chosen. But I'd like to just kind of dig into this dialogue a bit to kind of pick out where we can make that connection to the invisible values that are driving these behaviors and driving these statements as a way to demonstrate how you can do the same in your own situations, how you can glean and read between the lines in certain cases to really figure out what's driving and motivating people to respond to your leadership in certain ways that are unexpected perhaps. If you look at the line that Mrs. Colson has here, how long do you think it will take? As an egalitarian leader, she wants to empower Nisu to come up with his own schedule and really had no qualms asking him this question. She didn't think twice about asking this question. As a good leader in her own country, this is the norm. So in asking this question, she assumes that Nisu is comfortable setting a deadline for a deliverable that's owed to his leader. On the other hand, what we can tell from Nisu's words here is that his behavior is emblematic of a more hierarchical style. So through his words here, he doesn't own the project, his boss does. So he asks, when would you like it? Nisu expects, in this case, specific direction from his leader, Mrs. Coulson, and because, from his perspective, it's her job as his leader to give clear instructions for how she wants things to be done. Of course, Nisu is very capable of setting a deadline for himself, but it would be culturally inappropriate in his culture to do so, hence the nature of his response to her line of questions. So we have an opportunity for Mrs. Coulson as a leader to learn from this interaction. And of course, if you would to take a look at the India country profile on Culture Wizard, you could read about some of the insights that you see here, which is that in India, and of course this is coming from a bell curve of understanding that many people in India exhibit this value. Individuals expect that direction from their leaders. It would be inappropriate for Nisu to overstep the parameters of his role and behave in a way that mimics a leader. Of course, generational differences will reveal further variance on this expectation, where oftentimes what we're finding is that younger folks may acquiesce even less to hierarchical structures.
So that's a really interesting aspect of this process. Having been involved in culture training, global business skills development for many years, I can see that over the past 5 to 10 years, but just even 5 years, the generational differences in emerging countries make the role of the global leader even more challenging, because you cannot assume that the traditional cultural value of the country is prevalent when you're dealing with people across generations. It's dangerous to assume anything anyway, but it's particularly dangerous across generations because, for example, in this case, young Indians have been, for the past 10 years, exposed to all the same internet information and all the same internet tools, and find themselves much more direct and much more egalitarian than their parents did, or even than the previous generation did. So the role of the leader is even more complicated because it looks the same, it walks the same, but there's some fundamental underlying differences, and understanding how to motivate people at all levels is one of the skills you'll need to gain.
So building on that and going back to this notion of curiosity, this would be a good moment in time for Mrs. Coulson to reach out to a peer for some advice on what went wrong. She could reach out to someone she knows and trusts in India to ask why her behaviors were ineffective, and perhaps to seek advice or guidance on how to handle this in the future. It wouldn't actually be a good idea in this case to directly ask Nisu for his advice or feedback, given this demonstration of hierarchy that we see in their conversation, because this would likely violate the kind of nature of their relationship as a leader and a subordinate, causing a loss of face for both if Nisu were to have to explain why his boss doesn't know what's appropriate in an Indian context. So you can see the kind of nuance there as well. But I'd like to actually ask you all an open-ended question. In order to be an effective global leader, how would you flex a different hierarchical style or respond in a more effective way to a gap that you have within this dimension of hierarchy? Please go ahead and use the questions box to tell us, and be sure to let us know where you're from in the part of the world where you'd like to develop stronger leadership capability. And while you're sending us your thoughts, I'll quickly say that we use this kind of comparison on a horizontal spectrum to analyze gaps that we have as leaders with other cultures. Of course, this information represents that typical behavior in various countries and really doesn't apply to everyone in the same way. So you've got to be really keenly aware that individuals will differ from this country information. But these gaps give us clues as to how we can strike a certain balance through our leadership activities and really flex our personal comfort zone to respond to differences in appropriate and effective ways. So let's take a look at what you guys have shared in our questions area here.
Sean, one of the questions that came in was about how to generate motivation in a multicultural environment. How do you get someone from a culture other than their own, or a team of maybe different cultures, to have the intrinsic motivation to achieve a company's goals?
Interesting. I see one here as well from an individual from the U.S. Other teams may expect more bossing around, which is different from my consultative style. So very, very close example to what we've just seen in this dialogue. That's wonderful. One individual here is also saying that they may expect more deference to leaders in non-U.S. teams, to just be mentally prepared for that kind of behavior and not to misinterpret what's going on there, but to understand that that is the norm in whatever country you're looking at.
There was an answer here that was really good, that says set up a local leadership role to empower an individual. And the way that I'm understanding that is, again, you use your relationships and develop your relationships to gain greater insight into what's expected of you as a leader, and to develop that flexibility and that understanding.
There's actually a really good question here that I'd like to read. And the question goes, what if teams are a mix of both hierarchical and egalitarian type cultures? Do you treat individuals differently based on what you know about their background? This individual is from the U.S. but leads a global team. So the orientation that would be most effective in this scenario, and assuming it's more diverse than just a black and white picture of very hierarchical and very egalitarian people with lots of shades of gray in the middle, it's important to understand how to integrate cultural differences and to balance between various styles by generating a team profile, which you can actually do on TeamPlace, on Culture Wizard, and looking at that profile to facilitate a discussion on how you can integrate and compromise and find that middle ground that everyone can agree to by developing guidelines for high performance on your team that more or less synthesize like I said, a hybrid culture. And you can be as detailed as you want in creating norms for your team, generating rules for how you facilitate teleconferences, for example. How do you engage folks who may be more reticent to contribute? How do you allow space for folks who are quieter to speak up? It's really important to have that conversation, and as a leader, perhaps to weigh in a little bit about what you think would be most effective, knowing each person on your team. But that orientation of cultural integration is really, I think, the best way to figure out what to do to be effective. And one more comment I'll read here, which I like here from Austin. It says, build personal relationships with all team members before assigning work. Some team members will not do well at some tasks that contradict their cultural behavior. So really getting to know people before making decisions on how you want to flex your style as a leader, especially when it comes to hierarchy, is crucial. Thank you very much, everyone, for your thoughts there. So if I can kind of summarize a little bit before we kind of come to the ending points of our webinar, leading with a global mindset requires a relatively high degree of curiosity and intellectual curiosity about the world and why things are the way that they are. It requires an ability to handle the complexity and ambiguity that go hand in hand with doing business in a cross-national context or in an intercultural context. It requires the ability to form relationships with people that come from a range of backgrounds, and given the challenging realities and complexities that characterize this environment, it demands this high level of flexibility and a very strong commitment to reaching your goals despite the numerous barriers that you don't often see in a domestic context or in a single culture context. So with that, I'd like to point out some post-work or some further learning opportunities that you can pursue online. Of course, we've mentioned the Global Leadership Skills Learning Track. When you go to the homepage of Culture Wizard, you'll see a green tile that indicates global leadership. Click on that to find this track. We've got a brand new introduction video that really frames this whole model in a very nice way. You can watch that, share that with your peers. And of course, from there, start charting your global leadership life map. Getting in touch with different events, people's important moments in your life that have impacted your value system is one of the best ways to generate that authentic style and to get in touch with what makes you who you are as a leader. The Global Leadership Development tool that we've described is also there. You can take this to measure those 5 key attributes and figure out where there's room for improvement, where you may need to flex even more outside your personal comfort zone to reach your goals. And finally, the Global Leadership Calculator is our brand new version of our culture calculator that is now available on this track. Another very important way to develop a strategy, a personal development plan for your global leadership activities that can include ways of flexing for success.
And of course, when you integrate, keep in mind what the definition of the global mindset is, that it's the ability to reflexively adjust your behavior to the signals you're getting from the people. When you integrate these components, you have more confidence to read the signals and in your interpretations of the signals, and if it means moderating what your gut instinct might have been by examining the cultural motivation for different people's behaviors, it'll make you a better global leader. It'll enable people to have trust in you and your leadership, and thereby have trust in each other and collaborate more effectively, which is, of course, the subject of our next webinar.
And of course, I can't forget to mention that you should all download the Culture Wizard mobile app. If your organization provides Culture Wizard, you have complimentary access to this app as part of our relationship. You can go to your app store on your iPhone or the Google Play Store on your Android to do that. Just search for Culture Wizard and you'll find it. You can even re-watch a recording of this webinar, which will be posted next week, from your smartphones. All right, so I'd like to open the floor for questions and answers. We've got about 5 minutes remaining, so please go ahead and find that questions box and send us your questions. Mike, Charlene, and I, and Josh as well, will do our best to respond to those now.
I think there was a really interesting suggestion here about leadership flexing. And from Howard, ask questions instead of providing answers. Use multiple methods for generating ideas and solutions. Understand when sequencing of interventions can be choreographed to encourage participation. So again, it's all that understanding of someone else's perspective and then creating a strategy.
Great. There is a logistical question here. Can you please show again where to find these tools? I'll just go back in the presentation quickly to point out the Global Leadership Skills track on the home page. You'll see a green square that leads you to what you're seeing here on this slide. If you log into Culture Wizard on the home page, you'll see a green tile, Global Leadership Skills. Click on that, and you'll find all of the resources that we've listed in the webinar today.
And by the way, and you'll find it also directly in the tools menu on the site as well, which is on the top nav bar. Anything else? Questions?
I see one here that we might be able to help with, which is specific. I'm leaving for Shanghai on Monday. Any last words of advice for an up-and-coming global leader? Really interesting because we do quite a lot of work supporting executives doing business in China, specifically in Shanghai, and there's lots and lots of stuff that I think you can gain from looking at the expectations of management on the China country profile. But I would definitely engage your curious side to spend time with your colleagues, whether you've got a team of people that you're with, to to turn on your Chinese side and treat them to a meal, to a dinner, to a weekend excursion if you've got time for it, to go and spend real time with them outside of the office, which is going to be a fabulous way to connect on a deeper level. Spending more time than you would in your natural environment, perhaps in the West. I'm guessing you may be from the West, where you might want to be having some private time after your meetings. Spend more time with your folks in China, and that's going to be the best way to really demonstrate your interest in the relationship that you build with them. And that comes from personal experience myself.
And by the way, enjoy Shanghai. It's an amazing city. What's happened there in the past 10 years is mind-blowing. Anything else?
I do have one more question here from Michelle, which I think is very interesting. Do you think there is resistance from the more hierarchical cultures to being asked for input? In other words, when you ask questions and try to get different ways to engage your colleagues, from a U.S. perspective, you may be doing this in a very open way. Is there any pushback? And you know what I would say to you, Michelle, is that there is a time and place for questions within hierarchical cultures, and typically you want to first know that you've got trust with whoever it is that you want to get insights from, and to ask questions that may be a little controversial, a little sensitive. You may need to find a space where you're alone with that person. So a one-on-one, I think, is vital to getting information from folks in hierarchical cultures where they may not feel comfortable expressing an opinion that's perhaps maybe a more personal opinion in front of other people for fear of losing face or for fear of looking maybe contrarian, because their true feelings are very different from what the official position is of their company. For lots of reasons, you may need to find separate channels outside of your conference calls, outside of your group meetings, to extract that kind of input. And you may want to do it anonymously. It may be better to send an email than to have a phone call and to put someone on the spot, especially if they don't speak English as their native language. So you can balance between a lot of these ideas to figure out your best approach. But I don't think there's pushback. It's just finding the right environment in which to get that information.
And by the way, if you have a team of people that you work with in a hierarchical culture, and they are from different levels, they also might have some challenge giving feedback about the role of somebody senior to them. So be sensitive to the levels and the way people communicate between levels in a group setting.
Excellent. So we are at the end of our hour, so I'm just going to put up our final slide here to thank you for your time. If you'd like to email me directly for any questions specifically on the content of this webinar, please go ahead and do that. You can see my email here on the screen. If you'd like information on how to access Culture Wizard once more, info@rw-3.com is the inbox you can send an email to for instructions. Thank you very much for attending today, and best of luck to everyone in developing a global mindset.
Thank you.
Thank you.